step away for about 30 seconds and I'll be right back.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Kamala!
Yay!
Kamala! I said to do that.
Thank you. I'm very excited.
Me too. I was
Yeah, I think that's a
leaving
good choice.
Trader Joe's when the alert popped up, and I was like on that escalator, and I was like, yeah.
And now I started dancing around the apartment.
Yeah, it's good to feel excited about something, you know?
And optimistic.
I'm excited about tonight's meeting.
Thank you, Bill.
That's what I thought you guys were talking about.
Oh, God. No, I'm very excited.
Hey, David Weiss, are you joining us tonight? I see your photo, but not your video.
I'm here. Would you like me to be on video as well?
No, that's fine. I just wanted to thank you for all of the work you did putting together interviews for judicial candidates over the last couple of months. It's really, for those of you who don't know this, so I guess I might as well start in with some meeting business. There was the convention last night in Manhattan for to nominate judicial candidates to the New York State Supreme Court. So this is one of the things that we do as a club is we have delegates, judicial delegates who are actually on the petitions in the spring when everybody else is getting on the ballot. It's one of the group of people that we endorsed. I don't know if any of you remember that. But those delegates then get together in a convention to choose the nominees. There's no primary for those seats. It's just a convention. And in the past, there's been, normally a single marathon session where you get to hear from each one of them for 5 minutes. But David and some other folks over at, I guess, VID and DID have, starting last year and then this year, really pulled it together. And maybe Zoom made this easier for you, David, I don't know, but was able to pull together some longer sessions so that delegates and others who are interested could really talk to these candidates for, I guess, 45 minutes or more, right? You had hour-long sessions on it.
They were about an hour, and we really got to ask candidates anything they wanted, and it's really different than a happy hour type scenario or a fundraiser type scenario where you're kind of just, rubbing elbows. You really get to ask questions that you want to know about the candidates, and we learned a lot. So it was great. So thank you all for who joined from Grand Street's delegates.
I don't know if our delegates are on this call tonight, but I think they appreciated that whole process so much more this year because of the stuff that you were able to put together. And I hope we can, as a club, be a little bit more involved in that than going forward. So that was great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
A few other club announcements. I'm planning to put together a watch party next Thursday for Joe Biden's acceptance speech. So the Democratic convention is next week, Monday through Thursday. Biden will be giving his acceptance speech next Thursday, I guess, starting around 10. The convention starts at 9. So we'll just have I'm not exactly sure how it'll go, but we'll have a Zoom available like this so that we can kind of chat to each other while we're watching the proceedings. I haven't tried anything like that yet, but I know that actual in-person debate watch parties were fun. So we'll see if this works out as well. So I'll be emailing out about that. Wanted to let everybody know that there were some hearings today with the State Assembly and State Senate on Board of Elections issues, trying to address some of the problems that came up during the June primary to make sure that those things can possibly be addressed before November. Grand Street Dems and our 2 district leaders signed on to a letter supporting some specific improvements. And I posted that to our website earlier today. I'm just dropping that link in the chat in case you guys want to take a look at that. And there are a lot of people now, which is reassuring, who are watching this and trying to move things forward. I don't know exactly yet whether there's enough time or resources to get this really figured out before November. And New York City Board of Elections also has preparations to make for ranked choice voting, which starts next year for New York City elections. And my understanding is they've missed all of their deadlines so far because they've been so overwhelmed with absentee ballots for June. So there's a lot of stuff kind of rolling into more problems happening over the next few months. And we're trying to make sure that there's enough attention paid to that. Marion, do you want to give us a quick update? I asked you this earlier today on the development project on Broome Street and where that's at. Oh, make sure you, let me unmute you. You're still muted, Marion. Hold on a second.
You have to unmute yourself.
I did it. I did it.
Oh, there you go. You got to do
Got
yourself.
it. I'm trying to pull up this. So the Go Broome project, which is at the site of Broome and Norfolk, and it includes the synagogue that burnt, that had a fire recently. They've identified SVOCs and VOCs, so semi-volatile organic chemicals and volatile organic chemicals at the site, on part of the site. So in the site that is now the parking lot is going to undergo a Broomfield cleanup. And the rest of the site is not going to be identified as part of the cleanup, in spite of the fact that there has also been things identified in the site of where the synagogue was. So there was almost no public notice. The only public notice went out on that block, on the contiguous block of where the site is going to be. The only reason that we knew about it is because there's a local group that's been involved in this project for a while. When we found out, the time for public feedback was almost over. And so we reached out to Brian Kavanaugh and Yulene New, and Gail Brewer joined them to ask the DEC for an extension. So the date was May 29th, asked for an extension June 29th, and to July 29th. We just found out on August 4th that the extension was denied. And they said that there will be, the DEC says there will be opportunities for further public comments. So I don't know how much people know about this, but they're not giving us good information, and that some of these chemicals are quite volatile. I think some of you probably know about what's been happening at the site across from the Blue School. There's been a very involved community response to that. And I'm hoping that the Grant Street Dems will start to have an involved community response to this. It's very close to us. It's within a half a mile of 16 schools, of senior housing, which is right next door to it, of the Essex Street Station, and, you know, pretty close to Seward Park. And so basically what we're asking, and that Yulene and Brian Kavanaugh and Gail Brewer wrote a letter asking for the following things: that there be a more robust communication plan, especially considering that a lot of local residents do not have access to the internet, that there's more sensitive monitoring systems, that we understand that reducing chemical actions would trigger stop work at the site, which is not in the plan now, that they would include the site of the synagogue to ensure that any contaminants in this site are also remediated, more communication, and an emergency plan during investigatory work that involves the local police precinct, fire department, hospitals, etc. So I just wanted, I don't know if people are aware of this. I'm quite concerned. We know that these mercury and lead and whatever else is contaminants in the soil are very dangerous, particularly to old people who live right next door to the site. and many of whom live in Seward Park, and they're very dangerous to children. So I asked Jeremy to, we were hoping to do a campaign when we found out that that we thought we could get an extension. Now we don't have an extension, so we're going to keep on top of when the next period is for public comment. And we've already put together one poster, which will update a flyer just to inform people and try to get local input, which actually both Jeremy and Bill think is probably not the best way to go. So maybe our job is to reach out to local electeds and get more support. That's
Okay,
pretty
so
much
yeah, thank you. And we'll try to get some more information about that. And if there's some action that we can do as a club or as individuals, we'll make sure to get that out to folks.
Great. Thanks,
Obviously,
Jeremy.
development in the neighborhood continues to be just sort of this rolling issue, and the kind of notice that communities get is constantly a problem, and how these things get approved. I mean, it's over and over again, we're having the same issue. So the more we can hook into these processes, the better able we'll be to, if not stop this one, at least be able to modify or stop the next one, whatever comes forward.
Develop
So,
a system
Yeah.
to
Thanks.
push back.
Jeremy?
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Just sort of on a broader view, Community Board 3 next week is meeting the Land Use Committee about rezoning the Two Bridges zoning project, which some of you probably know about because I've been sending stuff out and Jeremy has. There was the Community Board 3 apparently got an architect to review or the likely sort of scenarios that will happen when it goes to the City Planning Commission. The one thing that the architect made obvious is the City Planning Commission is all about upzoning and isn't really interested in downzoning or anything like that. So one issue might be, going back to Jeremy's point, how do we deal with this? One thing might be to look to see how the CPC is appointed, where are the levers there? If they're appointed by any candidates coming up in 2021, we could ask people to make a commitment to put in people who are not all from the construction and architecture business, but also some people who are from the neighborhoods who might not be all upzoning is good. So I'm just going to suggest that if we could sort of look into that, which is a big local issue. It's probably one of the biggest issues that we deal with here in terms of how the upzoning works, what it does to affordable rents, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, well, thanks for that update. And we will try to put together more of an action plan or jump onto the Chinatown Working Group's action plan and see if we can be a part of that. All right, so let's move on to the meat of our meeting tonight. I'm just going to note that we're going to continue to meet with candidates for district attorney over the next few weeks. We'll have a meeting on September 2nd with Dan Court and Diana Florence, and we're going to have another meeting on September 23rd with Tali Farhadian Weinstein and hopefully Liz Crotty. So as long as nobody else jumps into the race, we might actually be able to get through all of the candidates. So tonight, first up, we've got Alvin Bragg. And what I'm going to do, Mr. Bragg, is just let you introduce yourself and tell us a little about yourself, and then we'll see if we've got some questions that you can answer for us. You need to
Unmute myself.
There you go. Yeah, there you go. Thanks.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much for dedicating the time to this. The race is obviously all the candidates believe essential and very important. So thanks, Jeremy. Thanks to the leadership of the club. I had the honor sort of being at your holiday event, and so really looking forward to tonight's discussion and hopefully dialogue going further. So for me, criminal justice reform work started when I was 15 years old. I grew up in Harlem during the height of the crack cocaine epidemic. And when I was 15, I was stopped at gunpoint and accused of being a drug dealer. And really from that moment on, I've been fighting for criminal justice reform. I was stopped countless times, 2 other times at gunpoint during the late 80s and the early 90s. Those early experiences are why I went to law school. I left Harlem and went to Harvard for college and law school, and came back and have been in this fight for the past 20 plus years, fighting in the courtroom for justice. I started out as a criminal defense lawyer and a civil rights lawyer. I then became a federal prosecutor focused on public corruption matters. And then I went to the New York State Attorney General's office and served as the #2 lawyer there, overseeing a staff of 1,200. And, you know, along the way, working on some of the office's biggest cases, suing Harvey Weinstein for a hostile work environment, suing Trump, the Trump Foundation and his children, and holding them accountable for misusing more than $1 million, working really in an innovative way for government, suing, criminally prosecuting a landlord and suing landlords on behalf of tenants, prosecuting employers who cheated workers out of their wages, and then standing and working side by side with survivors of violent crime and their families. And the thread throughout my entire career has really been police accountability work. When I was in private practice, my very first case was suing the state police for, and this will sound familiar to many, suing the state police for breaking up political and religious peaceful protests and using excessive force doing it. That was 20 years ago, and here we are again in our city. When I was a federal prosecutor, I prosecuted an FBI agent for lying and obstruction. And then when I was at the Attorney General's office, prosecuted a sitting district attorney who basically tanked a case where an unarmed Black person was shot at 8 times, and he said nothing to see here, and we ended up investigating the district attorney's investigation and prosecuting him. And just yesterday, I was in virtual court representing Eric Garner's mother and sister and other police accountability advocates seeking justice and details for them and for all of us around circumstances surrounding his death. So that's been my life's work. And I'll say there are a number of tremendous candidates in this race. I have respect for a number of them. I don't think you will find the mix of personal and professional experience that I offer someone who's, you know, posted bail for family and loved ones and then gone to the Attorney General's office and helped reform their bail practices. Someone who's, you know, sat side by side and navigated a loved one through our criminal justice system, and with the trauma of him being in solitary confinement, and then suing, using the power of government to sue one of our counties to reform their prison conditions, you know, or going from someone who had a knife at his throat and a gun in his face by people who were not police officers. That was also a part of my Harlem growing up, to then working side by side with survivors of violent crimes. So that's what I have to offer. And my vision for the DA office grows out of those professional and personal experiences. You know, one where incarceration is a matter of last resort, one that prioritizes reentry for those who are prosecuted so that when they come home, they have housing and job opportunities, which is the right thing to do, and also keeps us all safer. One that has an independent police accountability unit, building on work I've done in the past. I know that these things keep us safer, and that we can have a fairer, more just system that prioritizes public health and public safety. And I know that because I've done it. I really have lots of other things I want to do with the DA's office, including reform the sex crimes unit, but I'm going to stop now because I really want to hear your questions and be responsive to them. And then if I have any time left, I can tell you more about my vision of the DA's office. Thank you so much for prioritizing not just my time tonight, but this entire race. It's fundamentally important for our island and our city.
Thanks. And let me just, why don't I get started with the question, but everybody else, if you want to click the raise hand so I know you've got a question, or if you want to drop a note in the chat, either way, and I'll try to make sure we can call on people. Let me ask you, just like kind of logistically, how would you, as Manhattan DA, change police behavior?
So I mean, it's a fundamentally important question. We need to change police behavior based on some of the experiences I told you I've experienced, and then some of the cases I've investigated. So I've done this for the past 20 years, working side by side with police on cases that make us safer, but also investigating them. So fundamentally important for a DA's role is to set up a unit that is independent. And so one that does not have any other cases with the NYPD. So you have folks who are investigating police, and I would not just say excessive force, but police lying, as I mentioned, my FBI case is a very important issue. But we need to have people on those matters who are not also working at the same time with police officers from the same department. We need to have that unit reporting directly to the district attorney or the chief deputy. That's how we had it set up at the Attorney General's office. We need to prioritize transparency. So if there is no charge that results from an investigation, there needs to be a public report. We did that at the Attorney General's office. We issued reports which were kind of widely praised by police accountability advocates, setting forth all of our facts and our legal conclusions, and then proposed reforms to change the structure so that we wouldn't be back in the same situation, because obviously the goal is to not have these incidents occur at all. So that's specifically how I would structure the unit. There are also some more macro issues that need to be addressed. One is the scope of our system. Our police are over-policing us. We saw this as part of the discussion with the budget earlier this summer. So I would get police. My dad ran homeless shelters. We need to have people like him taking care of the homeless and not the police doing homeless sweeps. We shouldn't have police doing social distancing enforcement. We shouldn't have police, as our primary response in schools, and they shouldn't be doing our mental health response. Mental health in particular is 25 to 50% of incidents that result in a civilian death at the hands of a police officer. So that shrinking of the system, while it doesn't always go hand in hand in our public discussions about public accountability, is fundamentally important. If we start with that orientation of incarceration as a matter of last resort and what we want our police to do, we will necessarily have fewer police incidents that we've seen, not just in our city, but obviously across the country.
Thanks. Looks like Keen Berger has a question. Can you unmute yourself?
Okay, got it.
There you
go. What you say is great. I'm very on board with that. But I'm thinking this is a difficult administrative job. You've got to get all these hundreds of lawyers to do what you want to do and give the kind of reports. And I wonder what kind of experience you have getting other people to do stuff properly and respect you and all that. That's the question.
Thank you for the question. This is fundamentally a management job. And I've spent, I would say, I'm very confident in my lawyering skills, spent the last 20 plus years as a lawyer. But to your question, have spent a lot of time as a manager. When I left from being a federal prosecutor to go to the Attorney General's office, my first job there was Executive Deputy Attorney General for Social Justice. I oversaw 100 lawyers in the civil rights, healthcare, environmental charities work there. And so I had to sort of step in, learn how to manage, learn how to incentivize, learn how to look at, I talk about looking at whole people in both our training of them, in our hiring. And so I had that job for a couple of years. And then the police accountability work I described came via an executive order from the governor. The governor gave the Attorney General authority to investigate civilian deaths caused by police officers. It was a completely new unit. I had to build it from scratch. So I went out and hired the staff, came up with the training, built a statewide operation so that we could respond to a scene anywhere in the state, in a timely manner, and was doing that at the same time as overseeing the 100 lawyers in the Social Justice Division. The folks at the Attorney General's office were pleased with my performance in doing that. And then my last job at the Attorney General's office was Chief Deputy, where I oversaw the entire office, a staff of 1,200. And what I learned in these three different sort of functions was how to incentivize conduct. It's one thing to have these end results, but what I learned and really prioritized was explaining the why to folks, right? And not just saying we're going to do it this way. That's important to set clear, articulable goals, and not just to hold people accountable. I mean, I've had to fire people, I've hired people, I've disciplined people, but what I found to be fundamentally important is along the way, the transparency and the dialogue. This is why we're going to do it, particularly in the last role when I was overseeing our criminal division and articulating a different way of doing things. it was important for me to tell them why, and draw on my past experience as a federal prosecutor of why we need to be focusing on what I call kind of deterrence setting cases, large scale cases that will bring impact, and explaining to people why we want to do it that way, pointing them to the data, and then being open to questions and having robust dialogue. I mean, one of my favorite practices, or one of my kind of sort of favorite things I look back on that time, I love the people who were on the executive staff with me, but my goal every day was to spend as little time in the executive suite as possible. I would literally go on my calendar, block out time, and then walk the halls and pop in on people who were actually doing the work. And of course, respectful of the hierarchy, and they had other managers, but to hear directly from people who were going into court, implementing objectives I've set, and hearing directly from them when we need to do course correction or not. So I think the listening, the being available, the holding people accountable, these are all things I've done. And the things that are needed in the DA's office. The district attorney's office job needs top to bottom culture change. And so I've done that. When I would talk about the sex crimes unit, I would reboot that, redo that, overhaul it. So I've done that with another unit, started from scratch. There are other parts that will be more like when I stepped into a well-functioning 100-lawyer unit in social justice, and that we need to sort of course correct in terms of some of the white collar practices and refocus them on what they're doing to make it more impactful. And then obviously the DA's office is chief executive. That's like my last job in the AG's office. I wasn't the number one, but I was the number two. And I had to hire an exceptional team around me to then be the manager and to be the frontline folks trying to implement the vision. So I think I've done it, and I'm prepared to do it again.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful to me.
I muted myself. Marion, you had a question.
I love all of those things that you're talking about. And you talked about 20 years ago, people getting killed, and you talked about when you were 15, and I don't know how many years ago that is. So my question is, and my concern, I mean, we are all seeing what our police are doing, not just here in New York City, but all over the country. So I'm curious if any of these strategies have proven to be effective in actually changing police behavior, and where, and how the district attorney's office can actually facilitate that change.
That's a great question. I mean, I like to talk about all of the above approach. I think we are in a sea change moment, and that there are some tools that I think will be helpful that are coming about now in terms of law changes out of Albany. I would advocate everyone also to push for another one, which would I think lead to more fundamental change, the type you're talking about, which is in our state right now, officers can use lethal force, even if it's not a matter of last resort. So that's something that I think we'd see a lot of change if that law changed. But working within the current construct, I think if you had, when I had the statewide role, I was working in all 62 counties in New York. I think if we had the model in a state AG's office where they knew a district attorney could get sued, a district attorney could get prosecuted, that would have a fundamental change. We set up with that sort of independent unit reporting out and really laying bare the details. It's the same thing we're trying to do in this Garner lawsuit I talked about, laying bare the gory details of what happens day in and day out, and then being willing to bring the hard cases. It is hard to guarantee a jury verdict, but I can tell you that just the bringing of these criminal cases is impactful in terms of moderating police conduct, but also impactful in terms of educating the process of the juries. So I think we have a long way to go. I'm not going to sit here and say that we're right on the precipice, but I think that electing a district attorney who's going to prioritize this stuff I won't say it's rocket science, but on the other hand, having done it for 20 years and seen a lot of cases, I've learned a lot. I was in touch with folks in Minnesota about George Floyd, put in touch with them by people who have done these kind of cases, and you need to be in touch with them because you know how to do it. This is not a moment to turn over, to use an expression, the keys to the car to someone who hasn't done this. We need to draw on expertise and lean into the political momentum we're having to aid the lawyering, and then also to affect some big change. I mean, having the repeal of 50A is very important, right? To get the the police records out into the public domain. But then we need people in office who are actually going to put it out into the public domain, and then to hold officers accountable and not call them as witnesses when they've done something, which means that they're not worthy of being a witness. So I think we're in a moment where we really can affect change, but we have to get the right people into office to help continue to move the ball forward.
I started us a couple minutes late, so I'm going to get one more question in for you, Alvin, and then we'll move on. Bill, did you have a question?
Yeah, Mr. Bragg, thanks for coming. I have two questions. One will probably be a short answer. I'm pretty sure I know where you stand, but I'm just like to get people on the record about it. Is are you willing to refuse any money from any of the various police unions, the sergeants union or other, fraternal organizations? And then the second question I have is, some of the concern I have that hasn't been so successful is the real white collar crime that happens in New York, including things like wage theft. So I was wondering if you had given any thought to that.
Definitely. So on the first question, it is an easy answer. I would say, I don't think Pat Lintz or any of those folks are going to give me any money given my 20-year history, but I certainly wouldn't take it. Well, I'm not accepting money from police unions, from lobbyists, from corporations, or from any lawyer who's had a case in front of the DA's office for the past 4 years. On the second, so this has been, I've done a lot of work in the white collar space that I'm so proud of. Really using the law as a tool to help those who have been marginalized, and the law hasn't been used in that way by government, and wage and hour is one of them. We pioneered an approach at the Attorney General's office. We prosecuted the owner of a fast food franchise for paying an unlawfully low wage and having a second set of fake books. We brought cases that got wages back for people who worked at the airports, for people who worked at the car wash places, for people who were in other restaurants. It was a priority for us, and it was a sort of a labor of love to be able to use the law in that way and the power of government. And that would be a huge priority for me in the district attorney's office, to use the law to advance the work and the cause of those that the law has so often turned its back on. There are lots of other areas. Antitrust, where I've sort of, kind of broken up kind of large corporate enterprises who were unlawfully working together, securities cases who are bilking investors out of their money, consumer fraud cases. So this is an area where I've spent a lot of time and where I think we can be very impactful. And maybe I'll just sort of close on this one to sort of a contrast between the status quo and how I would sort of shift the model. So, the Garner case, we all know he's accused, we think without basis, of selling untaxed cigarettes. That was an NYPD priority. That just didn't sprout up from the ground. They were going street corner to street corner and grabbing up mostly black men for selling, what's known as loose cigarettes. That was a priority at the highest levels of the NYPD. It's absurd. It's also ineffective law enforcement. When I was at the Attorney General's office, and this is just to choose one example, we said, okay, well, the state is losing a lot of money from untaxed cigarettes. We should do something about it. We sued UPS and Federal Express, which were shipping hundreds of thousands of untaxed cigarettes. They resisted. We went to trial. We got more than $100 million back for the city and state. And so that's been the arc of my career, doing that type of impact changing work, not only in that domain, but with guns, with drugs, going after the owner of a $30 million business who was laundering millions of dollars for an organization that beheaded people. That's what we need law enforcement doing, not doing social distancing enforcement and homeless sweeps. And I think I can deliver that to the DA's office because that's what I've been doing for the last 20 years.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks so much for joining us, Alvin Bragg. I think we will all, by the way, have a chance at some point later this year to participate in a full forum before we make endorsements, but I'm glad you were able to join us for a short period of time this evening so we could get to know you. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much for having me, and I want to acknowledge Tahanie Aboushi. I know you're from next, so I have a lot of respect for. And I don't know if I'm supposed to stay on. I'm happy to stay on. If you want me to leave, I'm happy to leave.
You are welcome to stay on and listen. And I should let everybody know, by the way, that when we're done with Ms. Aboushi, we are going to keep this call going just for a few minutes if anybody wants to get a little bit more sense of the context of this race and who else is out there. So we'll be able to chat a little bit amongst ourselves then. But for now, you're welcome to stay on. And yeah, Lana and I go ahead and introduce Tahanie Aboushi, who's with us. And you also, you're welcome to introduce yourself, let us know a little bit about you, and then we'll similarly take some questions.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Good evening, everyone. Really thank you to the Grand Street Dems, Jeremy, for reaching out and including me in your meeting tonight. It's an honor to speak to everyone and learn about you and get to know about what your concerns are to make sure I bring them to light. I am a very proud civil rights attorney, as grassroots as they get. I'm a partner at a small boutique firm. My partners are my siblings. And our passion for civil rights started when I was 14 years old and my father was sentenced to 20 years in prison, 22 years actually. I have 9 siblings. Overnight, my mother became a single parent of 10 children. We are first generations Americans. My family immigrated to this country, my parents, when they were in their early 20s. And we grew up in a neighborhood that was very diverse, very cultural. My parents owned a small convenience store that employed half the neighborhood. Everybody had credit written down in a marble notebook. Everybody knew each other. And so it was very communal until my father was taken away. It was a very destabilizing experience. NYPD was in and out of our lives for a long time. Now, 20 years later, my father's been home for about 2.5 years. And so this is something that remained very fresh experience in my life. And for me, that inspired me to become an attorney because there was a moment in the courtroom, and this was in Brooklyn in the Southern District, in the Eastern District, when the judge had interrupted the proceedings and he looks at the prosecutor and he says, "What are you going to do with all these kids?" And he points to my siblings and I. And the prosecutor says, "They're not my problem." And so for me, the system became my problem. And I didn't accept no for an answer. I didn't accept any longer that the system was the system. This is the status quo. It is what it is. The fact that my siblings and I could have become 10 different problems, whether we suffered from substance use disorder, ended up in a shelter system, or ended up homeless, there would be zero accountability by this office. And it would be completely my mother's responsibility or our individual responsibility to do something about it. Thankfully, 3 of us became attorneys. We have doctors and many other professions that we're very proud of. And we joined forces to establish a law firm that was always for the people. And for the last 10 years, I've represented families across the city that I saw myself in, that I saw my mother in, I saw my siblings in. And so I've defended against racial and religious discrimination in federal and state court. I have represented communities that are plagued by police violence. And so I sue for excessive force. But I go beyond just the lawsuit. I ensure discipline, termination, and prosecution if necessary. And I've done that as one person. I also represent minors who are bullied, harassed, and sexually assaulted in schools, because I believe that the criminal justice system, its roots reaches right down into kindergarten, where stereotypes are forced upon children and their experiences governs how they become adults. And so it's very important for me to try to intercept those negative experiences and let them know that there is justice and there is accountability, no matter how big a system is. No matter how small of a person you are told that you are, or your community is, you can change the system. And I have been able to change policies in the NYPD and the FDNY and the Department of Education in response to the lawsuits that I have filed, and I'm one person. And what made me proud to run for Manhattan DA is I'm the only candidate that comes from a directly impacted community, meaning my family, Second, I'm the only candidate that doesn't come from an organization or an office that cheerleads these values. And that's very important. You know, Keen, you raised a very important question earlier when you said, you know, it's great when your whole office is aligned on a value. It's wonderful when your organization can give you that support to move you in the right direction. But when you're one person trying to change the ideology of an agency like the NYPD and you accomplish it, that is the experience that we need to bring to the DA's office, is someone who can both hold people like the NYPD accountable, but then also work with them to change policies in response to community needs. As someone that has been in hundreds of thousands of living rooms across the city, I've sat with moms and tried to figure out how to work feeding tubes after their children were shot by police officers. I've sat with single parents and fathers whose children were sexually assaulted and the DA's office would not take a report and law enforcement would not take a report. I've stayed up overnight trying to track down where these people's children are in the system to make sure I can be there for an arraignment, I can be there for a visit and get them whatever money they need to survive, especially in Rikers. And so for me, I've always been someone that stays very close to the community to represent communities that I come from and to deal with issues that are everyday for the everyday person, whether it's immigration, criminal justice, domestic violence, sexual assaults. They are not uncommon to most of our communities. And it was very important to me to not have people railroaded by the system and then say, you're not my problem anymore. So I wanted to make sure that when someone got a lawsuit from my desk or a letter from my office, that they know something was going to change. And I'm very honored and proud to know that I have been able to do that in the last decade. With the DA's office, what shocks people is that, you know, this is an elected position. And Manhattan has had 4 DAs in the last century. And when elected, hopefully, I will be the first female and the first person of color to ever hold this seat. The problem with that is that as an elected office, we are accountable and responsible to the people, and that has never been the case. And so in running for district attorney, my goal is to make this office transparent, accountable, and collaborative. Nothing about this process should be secret. No more trial by fires, no more, you know what, we'll fix it after we break it. We need to stop the damage and shrink the footprint of this office on our lives. Because what most people don't realize is that well after a case is prosecuted, the effects are felt forever. And it impacts the trajectory of families for generations to come. So when we look at graduation rates, home ownership rates, immigration statuses of people, when you look at financial stability in our communities, it all traces back to the footprint of the district attorney and how people are being prosecuted. Because by extension, there's permissible discrimination with housing opportunities, financial opportunities, educational opportunities. And again, we're constantly trying to fix something that we broke and exacerbated. And so in running for Manhattan DA, my plan is to overhaul the system. I don't plan to really make nice and give thoughts and prayers and do investigations and say the right things, but then never really put my teeth into it. I plan to hold law enforcement accountable, and that does mean prosecuting officers. And the fact that I've been able to do it as one attorney, I know with the resources of the Manhattan DA and the support we're going to get from the community, because my plan is to bring the community to the table, I know we can effectuate this change. And we are in a historical moment where power is being put back into the hands of people. New York had bills languishing in our legislature for over 5 years. And on the heels of George Floyd protests and all the elections coming up, people were scared. And so they voted the right way. And these laws were passed in a couple of weeks. Is it over? Are we done? Absolutely not. But does this mean that there is an opportunity to make permanent change and to overhaul a system, not in increments, by completely scrapping it and doing it the right way? Then now is the time. And that's going to take somebody that's not going to get there and sell out under pressure. Someone that's not going to get there and say, we have to be easy because NYPD is not ready for this, or the SBA union is not ready for this, or everybody that's been doing this for a certain way for decades is not ready for this. Because families like mine and like those who come from our communities have been railroaded by the system for decades, and no one thought they were moving too fast. No one ever thought to slow down and say, how are we going to take care of these families? What are we going to do about the children? What are we going to do about the future and state of our city? And so this is the time to do it. And that is why I'm running for Manhattan District Attorney.
Great, thank you very much for that introduction. I'm gonna, I guess, start with questions, but again, if anybody's got questions, please raise your hand or send me a note in the chat. My question is more or less the same question that I asked Alvin Bragg to start off, but you're coming at this from such a different point of view. One of the things we've seen, in particular, just over the last 6 months, as even new laws are passed and local politicians speak up for justice reform, the New York City Police seems incredibly resistant and still gets out in front of stories by having press conferences or tweeting statements that seem completely inappropriate. How do you take all of this sense of righteousness that you have as a DA? How does that translate into actual police reform? How do you, what specifically can you do that will, for example, not make the police officers just revolt against the prosecutors and go along with what you're trying to accomplish?
So I think that the NYPD and the SBA unions are just given way too much attention. You know, it's like a toddler that throws a tantrum, and instead of correcting course, you kind of give it what it's asking for. The DA's office must be independent from the NYPD. Yes, we work together, but we do not work for the NYPD. We work for the people of New York City. And our obligation is to be guardians of justice in pursuit of the truth, not convenience and not pressure. And so what that means is to do exactly what I've been doing. There's an officer that commits misconduct. We hold them accountable. I've worked with NYPD Legal. I've worked with their top brass. I've met with the last 4 police commissioners, and I've gotten change done, while at the same time holding them accountable, even if it means criticizing them publicly. And the beauty of this office, and one of the reasons why it's so powerful, and it's really just a fertile ground for change, is because of prosecutorial discretion. So while everyone wants to bicker and fight, in our office, under our roof, we are able to collaborate with community-based organizations to effectuate change. And that means if we are going to scale back on relying on law enforcement as the sole source of evidence, then we reach out to other community organizations and other sources for that kind of evidence. And when officers like recently who refused to show up for CCRB interviews, who refused to show up and sign what's called corroborating affidavits in support of citations that they wrote during their process, throw out the tickets. If the officer is not going to follow up on a ticket they wrote because they thought there was a basis for it, and they no longer feel that's a basis, well, then the ticket should be dismissed. We shouldn't do what the current DA did and kick it out until December until we can beg them to come in and follow through with their jobs. If there's an officer that is lying, then they should be taken off the force and disciplined for it. Because when you hold a public office of trust, you have the highest standard, and there should be absolutely no exception to that. And so there are not drastic measures. You know, we do this to teachers, we do this to principals, we do this to secretaries, we do this to elected officials across the country. Why would our law enforcement that have the authority and the power to violate our civil rights that are protected in more than one constitution in this country to railroad us? And it's going to take somebody that's not afraid to say this publicly and not afraid to act on it. So that's how I would do that as DA.
Okay, thanks. Keen, you've got your hand up. You got to unmute yourself again.
Thank you. I am touched by your personal experience and background. I think that is very motivating. But you said you were the only one, and I've actually listened to them all, and they all, no, several of them say they had personal experience negative from law enforcement when they were younger, and they became lawyers because of it. But you said you were the only one, and I thought that Bragg just said that. Did he? What? Explain this to me a little more. That's the question.
Yeah, my understanding is, and Bragg, I don't want to speak for you, so feel free to jump in. But my understanding is you were held at gunpoint by law enforcement.
You want me to speak? I'm happy to. So
no, I just didn't want to. I didn't want to take over your personal story, so I wanted you to clarify. My understanding was that you were held at gunpoint by NYPD.
Yeah, I was held at gunpoint 3 times, and I've had my brother-in-law was incarcerated and spent a year with me after he came home, which is where I draw the reentry. I'll go back to the mute now.
Yeah. So for my personal experience, Keen, coming from an actual prosecution and incarceration experience, is that to have my father having gone through that and recently released and still be on probation and jumping through the hoops of the prosecution system, even at 64 years old, is an experience that I haven't heard other candidates speak on. Maybe future candidates will jump in, but I know that is something that I haven't heard yet.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. I mean, it is compelling and terrible.
Bill, do you want to go ahead? You had a couple of questions also.
Yes, thanks, Ms. Aboushi. I'm gonna, just for the record, and I know the answer, I'm just gonna ask you about donations from, the various police unions and et cetera, but also about using the power of the district attorney to go after white collar crime.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the things. So I absolutely will not take money from any police unions or even independent expenditures by unions or organizations that are by extension representatives of law enforcement. And like Mr. Bragg, I don't think they would support someone who has spent the last decade pushing for discipline and termination and prosecution of officers. So that is not a problem. And then in terms of going after white collar, absolutely. Those are the sleeping beasts that have been allowed to use this office as a personal law firm while scapegoating communities of color and low income communities as the face of crime in this city. And so absolutely that must be a priority. Because when you think of a criminal, and a lot of the work that I've been doing on this campaign is to educate people on biases. Sometimes biases are intentional, sometimes they're not. But when you think of the word criminal, a white man in a suit does not come to mind. And there's a reason for that. And so we have to also change what is the face of crime and criminals in our city and make sure that no one is above the law.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We do have time for one more question. I don't see a hand up, so I might take it myself, but I want to give everybody a chance to raise a hand if you have it. Okay, then I guess I just wanted to ask about organizational experience and how you, whether this is, I don't know how large your law firm is, but whether this is a leap for you in any way to working with a larger organization. If it is, if it's not, if it is, how do you think you would manage that and make sure that there's maybe some, does that mean there's some continuity in the office? How exactly do you see that playing out in terms of a transition if you become DA?
Absolutely. I think that's an important question and one that lends itself to my purpose of collaboration in this office. This is not a one-woman show. This is where we bring in like-minded community leaders and people from the impacted community, not just making sure that the race is there and the color diversity is there, but people that have been through the system and people who have family members that have been through the system, and being able to manage it in collaboration with those types of leaders. I have managed so many different campaigns, a large caseload, federal and state court. When Trump went in and banned Muslims from the country, I co-led the legal team at No Ban JFK. We slept in the airport for 4 straight nights. and fielded emergencies from families all across the country and from 14 different countries outside of the US. And so having the ability to multitask in coordination with leaders, all in unison towards the same goal, is something that I'm very comfortable with. And honestly, something that is not hard to do in an office where you do have so many resources. The Manhattan DA's office boasts over a $700 million budget. So there's no reason to skimp on staff here or people that have the managerial experience to collaborate. But the most important thing here is fighting the cultural change that's going to come and making sure you can stand fearless in the face of power and the resistance that we are going to face. Because what is unique about the Manhattan DA's office is we do have Wall Street and other very strong special interests that will not take lightly to someone like myself coming in and putting the focus on them.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Ms. Aboushi, Mr. Bragg, thank you for joining us tonight. For anybody else, if you want to stick around for a few minutes just to get a little bit more context around this race, please do. And we hope to see you again at some point in the next couple of months so that we can actually go ahead and vote on an endorsement. Good luck to you both.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Good night.